25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh my God! Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They get it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, we celebrate week 11 by talking about Miami, Georgia, and LSU all getting outplayed. Plenty to take away from contenders and pretenders this week, and we really try to just make sense of the conference standings at this point here in the beginning of November. I welcome you into another edition of the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes, along with Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney. I'm Mitch Mason. Glad to have you with us on this Saturday night. It's been a very interesting day of watching football because at times, especially in the morning slate, there was nothing compelling going on. We had some compelling football in the afternoon window, but Ole Miss really pulled away from Georgia. And then in the night slate, you had LSU just getting absolutely outplayed from stem to stern at home at night in front of a raucous crowd. I think, honestly, the most entertaining game of the day of real consequence might have been Miami and Georgia Tech. Colorado and Texas Tech was fun as well. We're going to talk about all of those games in their due course. But, guys, I think the proper way to approach this is to really try and distill everything into contender or pretender, right? I mean, because, Trey, as your tagline says, super teams are dead. We're going to talk about the demise of Georgia here in a minute. There's nobody other than maybe Oregon that has just a firm two hands at 10-2 on the driver wheel of their campaign this year. And that's scary. But it also makes for a lot of entertaining football talk as we come to you for our Week 11 recap.
Yeah. Some say scary. I think awesome, right? I think that's one of the, when we think about some of the best years and most fun, entertaining years that we've remembered in college football, it's those years that there wasn't really a dominating team and the championship truly was in doubt. So I'm excited to see how these last few weeks unfold because we truly don't know what's going to happen. There's teams that should not have lost today or should not have lost in the manner that they did today that just completely surprised us for the wrong reasons. And that's what's going to keep us really entertained over these last 3 weeks of November going into conference championships.
Yeah, as we go down the slate, and I think what we're going to do in tonight's live show, just to make it economical, is go kind of conference by conference. So we'll talk SEC first and go from there, if that sounds good with you guys. I think what makes the most sense here is to kind of analyze a team by their strengths and weaknesses, because very clearly there's not a team that just jumps off the page in each conference where they're complete on both sides of the ball. Every single team has some sort of fatal flaw. And today you saw Miami's run defense get absolutely gashed. Georgia has no offense. And whenever they do turn the ball over, whenever they're trying to protect Carson Beck and it's not working for them, they just don't have the horses to then go out and get a game against a team like Ole Miss. LSU couldn't defend against an athletic quarterback. Unless you have a stone statue in the pocket, LSU's not going to be able to do anything against you. And so I think that's what makes this playoff scenario so interesting to try and diagnose. And that's what we're going to try and do over the next, hour or so. If you are new to the show, we'd love to have you hit subscribe. Appreciate you guys joining us here in week 11. We do 3 episodes a week. We'd love to have you join the Jimmies and the Joes by hitting subscribe on the YouTube side, if that's where you're watching the live stream, or if you're listening to the podcast a day or two after on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get those podcasts. Join the family and come talk ball at 3TechPod on all of our social media accounts as well. So, guys, without further ado, let's get into our storylines, and let's start with the SEC storylines. This is brought to you by homefieldapparel.com. Use our code 3TechPod for 15% off if you are on the Indiana bandwagon. They've got a 10 Indiana shirt, a first of its kind. Indiana hitting that mark for the first time in school history. We will talk Hoosiers when we get to the Big Ten. But 3 big stories here in the SEC. Ole Miss 28, Georgia 10. Alabama thumps LSU at home 42-13. And then I did throw in Texas 49, Florida 17. I think mostly because of what Quinn Ewers was able to do today in a real stock up game for him. But Trey, I'll toss it to you first. Which of those two main games, Ole Miss and Alabama coming out winners, which of those two shakes the landscape of the SEC more to you and kind of steals that headline going into Tuesday night where we'll have new playoff rankings?
I think it's got to be Ole Miss for a couple of reasons. I think, we knew that the loser of Alabama LSU, no matter who it was going to be, was probably going to be out of playoff contention. So obviously the result of how Alabama demolished LSU was very unexpected, but the end result is LSU's out, and we can dissect that. We can talk about what went wrong, but the seismic thing here in the SEC today was Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin finally getting it done and just dominating Georgia. The score is 28-10. That doesn't really tell the full story. That might, if you didn't watch this game, you might think that was a little close, maybe back and forth, that Ole Miss pulled away late, but it was a dominating effort. And the offense really couldn't get going as much as it did last week because of the weather situation in Oxford. But the Ole Miss defensive line was wreaking havoc. Carson Beck was being 2024 Carson Beck. And it just resulted in Ole Miss making a big statement that, hey, we forgot about them and we shouldn't have after their two early losses, because they're back. They're clicking on all cylinders at the right time. And they look really scary, guys. They look like a team that nobody in the country is going to want to play the rest of the year and going into the college football playoff if they can win out.
I think for me, I don't know that anybody that counted Ole Miss out was necessarily wrong when they lost to Kentucky at home, and then they lost to LSU. There was a weakness about the team where you wondered, okay, if they do get punched, are they able to get back up? Garrett, I think the defensive line has been the strength for Ole Miss this year. They're the top defensive line statistically in the country. They got after Georgia again today. But the offense showed some real resiliency and creativity, whereas against Kentucky, it felt like when Plan A got stymied by Mark Stoops and the troops, then suddenly Lane Kiffin didn't know what to do. Jackson Dart didn't know where to go with the football. Dart gets hurt on like the second play of the game, and they have to turn to a true freshman to come in and score that first touchdown. But once Dart came back in on a bad left ankle, it felt like he took responsibility for that game and said, nope, not this time. Today it's going to be different.
Yeah, and the thing that's kind of crazy to me about this game is Ole Miss did a great job driving the ball down the field. They didn't convert all of their drives into touchdowns. This game could have been a lot uglier based on their inability to score when they got down in the red zone, and kind of their inability to finish some of those drives. Caden Davis kicked 5 field goals today. Mm-hmm. Those are 5 drives that you could have realistically, gone down and put up 7 instead of 3, and we're talking about a very different game. 3 of those were inside of 35 yards. And so, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, Ole Miss did a good job moving the football. I'm concerned about Georgia's defense more than I may be concerned about the offense. The offense doesn't click at times, but they've got some dogs to kind of get past some of the guys. The defense had some serious spacing issues. The defense had some serious issues actually covering guys and being in the right spot. Georgia's just not the same team that we've seen recently, right? They're just not the same team that we've seen in previous years. And it's starting to get exposed now that they're going up against more talented teams. I described it, I can't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, when I said Georgia's just kind of this team that thinks they can go out there and out-athlete you right now. And now that they're getting up and they're playing a couple teams that are close to them in talent level, the better coached team is turning out to be, the opposite side team. It is turning out to be Ole Miss. And the big thing for them is they now have a massive game next week. They've got to go stave off Tennessee at home next week. And this is a Tennessee team that's still playing, borderline in the driver's seat for the SEC. They got to get stuff figured out fast, because the offensive production, the defensive production, nothing was good enough to get today against Ole Miss, and they got to figure it out quick.
It felt like for Georgia, nothing clicked today. Every time they needed to make a big play, they couldn't get it done. And to me, as I step back from this game, Trey, we talked about it in the preview show. This was a statement game, not only for the SEC this year, But I think for 2, 3, 4 years to come, and that's so difficult to project necessarily because with the transfer portal and NIL and the way that this game is moving in such a year-to-year calendar, it's tough to know if one team is going to be worth their salt and then even competent the next year. I think Michigan is the perfect example of that, right? A national championship, and now we're struggling to get them to a bowl game this year. For me, I think Georgia's dynasty is dead. I think Kirby Smart is an excellent coach. He's got a great program at Georgia. But now that you've lost multiple games inside the conference, you don't control your path to a conference championship game, and your playoff hopes are on the rocks. I think saying that Georgia has a firm control over the SEC, over college football, I think is silly at this point. And I didn't expect Georgia to fall like they have this year. I really thought Georgia would be the one constant in a conference that was expanding, and there were going to be so many teams that were figuring out how to knock each other off. I think the parity has been largely expected within this conference. And we knew Georgia had a brutal schedule. But if there was a team that was built to weather a schedule that everybody else in the conference probably goes 7-5 against, I thought it was going to be Georgia. And yet that's not been the case, right? Mike Bobo has taken this offense back to the Stone Age. They cannot run the ball. They had 59 yards on the ground today, guys. Ole Miss is elite at stopping the run, but 59 yards is an embarrassment. Carson Beck continues to turn the ball over. He met Matt Corral's record from, I think, 2020. He's thrown 12 interceptions in the last 6 games. That is a SEC record. This is not the Carson Beck that was checking it down to Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey last year, right? It feels like once he's lost his security blankets, he just doesn't know where to go with the football. And so when I look now at where does Georgia go from here, Garrett, you mentioned they've got to go in and they've got to survive Tennessee next week, who now may be without Nico Iamaleava. He left today's game with an upper body injury. Nobody seems to know what his status is going to be. Nobody even knows really what the injury is. But Georgia is on the rocks, I think, not only for some sort of outside shot at making the playoff, but understanding where they stand in the SEC ecosystem going forward. They should be at the top, but if you can't go on the road and beat Tennessee next week, then where are you putting the Dogs next year? 3rd, 4th, 5th? You start to see them fall down the board.
We are in a new era of college football with the 12-team playoff and with the transfer portal and with NIL and all that good stuff. And the reason that Georgia's falling off is because they just haven't figured out how to win in this new era. And the reason that we have dynasties in any sport, in any era of any sport, is you have one coach or one program that just figures it out, right? Like we had Nick Saban for the last 15 years almost. He had a chokehold on that college football system in that era. And lo and behold, when things start changing, he starts to retire. He retires, right? And right as he starts to lose that death grip, he retires on top. And I can't blame him for doing that because it's really hard to get your program in a position where they just own their era and have figured out how to win in that era. We don't have a team that's done that yet. This is a brand new era of college football. We don't have a coach who's figured it out to the point that they can win unequivocally and be just considered the guy of this new era of college football. And until we do, it's going to be wide open every single year, and it's going to be who figures out the transfer portal. Kirby Smart could go get an amazing quarterback in the transfer portal next year, and you're going to look at his defense, and you're going to look at the talent that he's brought in through high school recruiting, and you're going to say, yeah, they should probably be the number 1 team in the country if he gets one of the best transfer portal quarterbacks, right? Mm-hmm. We just don't have anybody that's taken this era of college football by the horns yet. We thought it could be Kirby, but he hasn't proven he can do that yet. So until proven otherwise, it's wide open for anybody.
Well, Trey, to your point, I don't think that this era of college football probably lends itself towards anybody being able to do that, because not only do you have the same problems you used to have, which is college players graduate, right? You can't keep your same guy, right? You can see guys that, NFL, NBA, MLB, you can sign a guy if he's young for like 10 years and keep him around. You can build a team around like a primary player. As good as players can be, they can only be there for 4 years, 5 years if they get the extra. COVID rules, different, obviously, but, coming up pretty soon, it's going to be only a few years. But now it's become a thing where if you have a bad year, if you have some injuries, an unfortunate road loss or something like that, your talent can walk straight out the door, no questions asked. And now you're having to worry about that as another issue. Guys, I don't know that there's realistically a way that someone else can build that. I think if you're going to build that, you have to build it through player development, showing them they've got a path to the NFL. And you probably have to build some kind of culture to convince guys to stick around. Right now, I don't know that Georgia has that. I don't know that they have the stick around type culture. They got the NFL development culture, that's for sure. But I don't know that they have the stick around culture. They're going to have to fix some stuff in the locker room. You're going to have to start to kind of turn your attention towards retention as opposed to just, what can we do on the field? Because it doesn't matter at a certain point, right? You got to have the dogs to do it. And right now, Georgia, I don't think quite has the dogs to do it.
As far as a coach who maybe has figured out how to win in this new system, guys, it might be Lane Kiffin. It might be Kiffin these might be the early days of all of that talk.
Yeah, unless you got Kentucky out there.
All of the transfer portal king, branding paying off, because Kiffin had all the talk. He had some nice wins. He had some nice seasons. They got to 10 wins for the first time in program history last year, right? Like, you could see an upward trajectory, but he didn't have a big win. He didn't have a statement win over a top 5 team. He was winless against top 5 teams coming in. He was 3-15 against top 10 teams coming into this weekend as well. We broke that down on our preview show. But this was a different weekend in the Grove, and not everything went their way. It wasn't like they punched the Bulldogs early, made a statement that Georgia just never got over. They lost their starting quarterback for an entire drive. It was pouring rain. Like, everything was kind of in place for Georgia to be able to negate whatever home field you get from Vaught Hemingway and turn this into a ground and pound, grind it out. We're going to be more physical than you SEC victory, the way that Georgia has for years. And they weren't able to do that today. And I think that might signal a little bit of a changing of, at least a change in the tide, not the Alabama Crimson Tide. We're going to talk about them in just a second, but a change in the direction of the conference and by larger extension, the sport, right? And so I think that is going to be something that we watch for the next months, years to come. What does consistency actually say about your program, and how can you project forward on a week-to-week basis? We're rewriting a lot of these scripts, a lot of these formulas that kind of determine who's going to win, who's going to lose. And with that, let's move to Alabama 42, LSU 13. Guys, we set this up as an elimination game in the SEC, and the broadcast was very slow to say it. Chris Fowler kept saying the loser of this game is in trouble. Let's call it what it is. LSU is eliminated now from the college football playoff race. They're eliminated from SEC championship contention. You would have to have an unholy slate of results over these next couple of weeks in order for LSU to get back into it, right? Not necessarily counting that out, but let's count it out.
They're not mathematically eliminated, but for all practicality, they are eliminated.
Exactly. For the desire to have a progressive discussion here, we'll count them out. But as disappointing as the loss for LSU was, and it's very easy to pile on LSU. They were off a bye week. They were at home at night. Brian Kelly is supposed to be good in these situations, and yet 42-13, they were never in control of this game for a second. Garrett Nussmeier continues to turn the ball over. The offensive line that LSU bragged about, hey, we haven't given up a sack all year with the starters when they came into College Station. They got blitzed to death tonight, and they had absolutely no answers. The running game looked good for the first couple of drives, and then that dried up very, very quickly. As easy as it is to focus on all of that with LSU, Trey, Alabama, off a bye week, looked as impressive as they possibly could. Jalen Milroe was calm. He was collected, and he used his biggest advantage, his legs, to absolutely decimate the Tigers and take those fans out of it really from the early get-go.
Yeah, it was utter domination from the word go, and it was Alabama sticking to what they knew was going to be a winning game plan. We saw this. We've seen LSU struggle with this all year. We saw it week 1 against USC. We saw it in the South Carolina game. We saw it when the A&M made the switch to Marcel Reed. a quarterback that can use his legs as a weapon is LSU kryptonite. You add in that Jalen Milroe's ability to hit a deep ball or two, at least a threat of it. He didn't really have to tonight. I think he finished with like barely over 100 yards passing. But yeah, you add that threat in, and it's just something that this version of the LSU defense has not proven they can stop in multiple chances this year. So credit Alabama for having a great game plan, sticking to it, and unlike the Georgia game earlier this year, staying focused and just utterly dominating an opponent, especially on the defensive side of the ball for the entire game. They took the crowd out of it, like you said, and they didn't give LSU a glimmer of hope on the defensive side of the ball. They just utterly thwarted every single thing that the Tigers tried to do.
Garrett, for Alabama, who has to be hot now, they've got to go on a run down this stretch if they want to make the playoffs. It looked like they found something. It looked like they found an offensive identity tonight. It looked like defensively, Kane Womack just said, okay, we're blitzing. We're bringing 6. We're bringing 7 just about every single down. And if you beat us over the top, congratulations. Part of it was he was allowed to do that because it was an absolute monsoon in Baton Rouge. It was raining sideways. When they started the broadcast, they said, well, we might have some intermittent rain. It's showering right now, but intermittent. And it was like, as soon as Chris got done delivering the weather report, the skies opened and it started pouring. But the Tide needed a statement like this off a bye week to feel good about their chances of making it to the college football playoff. And I think to feel good about Kalen DeBoer leading their program in the way that Tide fans hope it continues.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job, albeit against an LSU team whose flaws have now been exposed, right? That's the one thing I'll say about the Tide is, you looked really good, but I wouldn't necessarily say that this is, a all-world beater LSU team, right? We know that they have it in them to win the big game, but we also know that, after kind of what Trey was talking about, being able to, expose you with a running quarterback, all you had to do was say, like, okay, like Milroe's going to go do his thing. He, runs for 185 yards. So, it's definitely a good win. The good news for Alabama, though, is they can kind of coast here on out. I think they got like Mercer maybe next week, and then you get to go finish the season against Oklahoma, and then you get the Iron Bowl, and Auburn has not looked very good at all. So about as soft a close as you can ask for if you're Alabama. That puts them at 10-2, probably out of the SEC championship game. A 10-2 Alabama team probably makes the playoff. So I think Alabama's almost all but punched their ticket. Maybe they don't have quite the signature win. I know that this was a massive statement against LSU, but maybe we'll see LSU kind of fall off. I don't know how good that's going to look at the end of the season. But in the rank order of teams that go, all it takes is a couple mistakes in front of you. Tennessee dropping to Georgia, A&M, Texas, that could go either way at the end of the season. Alabama's in a really good spot right now. And I think if they can kind of build some momentum, kind of like what you were saying, Mitch, keep finding that offensive identity, figure out what they want to be on offense, get things clicking, they could start to peak at the right time going in and, who knows, maybe they could host a playoff game. And if you get to do that, I like the Tide to be able to maybe make a little bit of a run here.
Yes or no? Contender or pretender for Alabama, given what we just saw at LSU?
Yeah, I think so. I think they could contend for the entire thing, and it pretty much looks like what it looked like tonight. It means that Jalen Milroe has to be Superman, and if he's going to be Superman, he has it in him to take him all the way. Yes, it's going to take some, good defense. It's going to take some blitzing, some turnovers, stuff like that, but I think Milroe, if he can get hot, we saw what he did last year. This year's been a regression, but maybe it's just picking up the offense a little bit slow. If he can pick up this offense, figure out what they want to do, I think they can win it.
I think they'll be a contender as well. I think they'll be hosting in the first round. They're going to be 10-2 on 6-game win streak at that point. I think, if I'm doing my really quick memory and math right. So one of the hottest teams in the country going into the playoff and hosting a first round playoff game in all likelihood, if things play out how they should. And yeah, I think that absolutely constitutes a contender.
Texas A&M was off this week. They're obviously focused on Auburn in 2 weeks and then Texas to finish out the regular season. Let's talk about the Texas Longhorns very quickly, and we'll move on to the ACC to talk about Miami and their loss today. Longhorns 49, Florida Gators 17. The Florida Athletic Department makes the idiotic decision to release a press statement saying that Billy Napier is the head coach going forward into 2025, full confidence. And Florida immediately just gets diced up from the word go. They didn't have DJ Lagway. Graham Mertz is obviously out with an ACL tear. But Aiden Warner, the Yale transfer, was abysmal today. They couldn't run the ball. Texas just got to do whatever they wanted. Trey, you and I talked about how there's probably not going to be a ton that you can take away from this other than Texas doing things fundamentally sound. And I thought they did that today on both sides of the ball, really all three phases, even with the special teams. Specifically, though, Quinn throws for over 330 yards, 5 touchdowns, a career high from him. This performance seemed like one that you had to have to feel like Quinn can lead you not only back to the playoff, but go a step further and really be a contender for the national championship. And I thought he did enough today to say, you know what, Quinn, given the performance that we saw today, Quinn absolutely can get you to that goal.
Yeah, if you're a Longhorn fan, you're not just feeling good about Quinn, you're feeling good about your entire team after this performance today, because this is what top 5 teams are supposed to do at home against a team that's overmatched. You mentioned Quinn's stats. That was with, 1 possession in the third quarter, maybe 2. Yeah. Arch Manning took a lot of snaps in the second half today. And the score wasn't even that close. It was 35-0 at halftime. I think Quinn got one more touchdown drive in the third quarter and then called it a day. So you can't ask for anything more than that. It was, we mentioned on Thursday, like you said, you're not going to be able to take away a ton from this, especially with a third string quarterback and everything that Florida has going on. But this is what you're supposed to do in those situations. We've seen Texas Longhorn teams in the past, not too distant past, play around with these games and make them way closer than they should have been. So got to walk away feeling pretty confident and pretty excited about the last 3 games if you're a Texas fan.
I think Texas is without a doubt a contender. Their defense was stifling today. They were getting plays made by all 3 phases of that defense, turnovers forced. It was truly an impressive showing from those in burnt orange today. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other SEC game, and that's the conclusion of the Missouri-Oklahoma game.
Absolutely nuts.
Oklahoma strip sacked, Drew Pine, right, and scoop and score, take the lead, 2 minutes left. Drew Pine, listen, not exactly the guy that you want leading a fourth quarter tie the ball game kind of drive. But lo and behold, he does. Ties the ball game up with just
Luther Burden and Theo Weiss tied the game up. But yes, Drew Pine was also there.
One of those, the throw to Burden to get them inside the 20-yard line, that thing hung like a duck, and the Sooner defender, the safety, just fell down. So
but Burden's effort, they highlighted it on the broadcast. His effort to turn his body around so that he could get a foot in was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, a couple plays later, throw to Theo Weiss. I mean, again, this was a really good throw. Dropped the ball in the bucket. Nice foot down for Theo Weiss. Oklahoma's got a chance, okay. A minute 15 on the clock. Let's drive down. Let's take the lead. Let's win this game. Jackson Arnold strip sacked. Scoop and score for Missouri. They win 30-23. Guys, I don't think Oklahoma is going to go to a bowl game. There's just like there's no way they can make it to a bowl game. Missouri's going to hang in the top 25.
Still alive. They can go 10-2.
They are technically still alive. I think we would all be absolutely stunned if that happened, but I just had to shout them out. Let's move over to the ACC and talk about, if it wasn't for Ole Miss beating Georgia, this would have been the upset of the day. Just the second time since 1936 that Georgia Tech has beaten a top 5 ranked opponent. They beat Miami at home 28-23. The headline for this one, Garrett, Miami's luck finally runs out. We had been talking about, winning is a skill, and Miami's figured out how to do that. And so we do have to give it to them, but there's no doubt the defense has been leaky at best this year. They had given up at least 31 in 4 of their previous 5 games coming in. And for Cam Ward, the magic just kind of ran out, right? The team didn't make those 2 or 3 plays that had flipped the script on opponents in weeks past. it felt like you could see the writing on the wall here. If not Georgia Tech, at some point during the season, Miami was going to drop one of these.
Yeah, and I mean, look, we had talked, and I've joked about it being home cooking for them, and they've been getting some calls to bail them out. Didn't get them today. Wouldn't have mattered anyways because Georgia Tech looked like the better team today. It didn't look like a fluky, weird upset. Like Georgia Tech just dominated. They dominated in the run game. Miami runs for 88 yards. Georgia Tech runs for 271. That's that's a statistic to point to if you need it. You really want to talk about how embarrassing this should be. Georgia Tech won throwing for 99 yards. They threw the ball 16 times as a team for 99 yards. And, a couple of touchdowns. That's nice. But this was not a passing attack for Georgia Tech. This was let's just put our nose, in a gap. Let's put our, hat on a hat, and let's just go win our space, right? Win what we need to. They did it. They took care of business. Couple of gutsy third down conversions in there as well. Yep. And they just found a way to do it. They were the better team today. And this was a gut check for Miami. They had been able to skate through a pretty weak schedule to this point. Hadn't really looked all that impressive doing it against a couple of teams recently. And now they got to go find a way to finish the season because their margin for error in an ACC conference that is not necessarily that impressive has just gone down to 0. They cannot drop another game. They have to win out. They have to win their conference.
The nice thing for Miami, and, folks were very quick to point out, well, this doesn't actually mean anything for Miami. So far as it eliminates them from the ACC title race, of course not. They're still sitting now in second place. All it really does is elevate SMU into sole possession of first place, which, how about the Ponies?
It does open up a potential tiebreaker scenario, though.
But it does do that. It does do that. It means that Miami has to win out. And, they still have a path to get to Charlotte. There's still a path to get to the playoff. But I also think the committee that worked overtime to advocate for them in this first round of the playoff rankings, it undid a lot of hand-wringing by those in Grapevine earlier this week. And I think what it does is it exposes the flaws of this team. The front 7 for Miami got worked today. I mean, the run schemes from Brent Key's team were beautiful. The counters on repeat, both of the quarterback and the running back variety, Miami had no way to stop that. And so it allowed them to win that ballgame, control that ballgame, run the clock out, really in all 4 quarters, and dictate the pace of play inside Bobby Dodd. Trey, I'll ask you. Miami is still very much in the running, but given what you saw today, contender or pretender for the Canes?
I think you got to say pretender, especially not just today. It's really easy to say that today with the loss to Georgia Tech, but you guys said it. This was a long time coming. This was weeks in the making. They've been squeaking games out, maybe getting some help from officiating in some of them, questionable officiating, but this was a long time coming. I think it's clear now that this was not a fluke, and it should have happened a few weeks ago, and we shouldn't even be maybe even considering it at this point. But they still have a path because of the auto bids. So they will have a chance to get in, and they do have enough talent to win a game or two if they get in and the matchup is correct. But as far as a true national championship contender goes, I have a hard time saying that right now.
I think if Miami had shown the ability to play some shutdown defense, I would chalk this up as their one, right? They're not eliminated, but boy, you learn a bunch of lessons, you improve on them, you go forward. But they haven't shown that ability to play solid defense, to get off the field consistently and win in other ways than just winning a shootout. And I think that's what really concerns me for this Miami team. That, and there were, again, a couple of errors from Cristobal and staff. Situational awareness felt like it was at a low again. And you would have thought that this staff would have been primed, right? You lost in one of the stupidest ways in college football history last year to Georgia Tech. You would have thought everybody would have been dialed this week. Wasn't quite the case. His post-game press conference saying, well, we did the little things right, but we need to do them better. Very uninspiring post-game press conference. I'm out on Miami. I've got them as pretenders as well.
Yeah, your case in point there is calling a timeout coming out of the 2-minute at the
Yes.
end of the fourth quarter, and that was on a punt. So, like, on punt, what you basically got to say there in the 2-minute is, yeah, don't let up the fake. But apparently forgot to say that, so needed to sprint down the sidelines with his hands waving. It didn't end up mattering because they fumbled, and so it obviously didn't end up mattering to the end result. But yeah, that could have ended up costing them in a situation where they might need to stop them later on. But yeah, ultimately just better team wins today in Georgia Tech.
Elsewhere in the ACC, you had Clemson winning 24-14, a very slow and kind of wishy-washy game between Clemson and Virginia Tech. Virginia hangs on to beat number 18 Pitt, so the Panthers have officially ejected from the ACC and playoff contention. It was fun while we knew you. I guess they were 7-0, and yeah, they've lost back-to-back weeks. Boston College beats Syracuse. Duke beats NC State, and then Chase and I had to do a double take when we saw the final score. Notre Dame 52, Florida State 3. The Noles are now 1-9. It's just the third time in program history that Florida State has ever had at least a 9-loss season. Brutal scene for Florida State. Trey, any other takeaways from the ACC here today?
Yeah, a lot of Boston College got a great win. Syracuse, I didn't get to see a ton of this game. I checked in a couple times, but great win for Boston College. And Cal got their first win as an ACC program, first ACC win on Friday night.
Yeah, Friday night over Wake Forest, but shootout, 46-36 over the Demon
Good job going across the country, getting it done.
That's right. Yeah, Clemson, I guess for what it's worth, out of the ranked teams, still technically alive. They're 6-1 in the ACC play, right? Unfortunately, we don't get to see them play Miami, so they will need help to get to Charlotte.
Well, it's gonna be a tiebreaker. Like I have no idea who has the advantage if both of them go 7-1. Like I will tell you, I have no idea who has the advantage in the tiebreaker in that scenario.
I would imagine. I guess, yeah. I don't know what the mathematical.
We'll do some research. We'll talk about it on
formula is. Yeah, what the order of operations is. But from everything that I read today, Miami still is in the driver's seat to get to Charlotte. So what metric that is, I don't know off the top of my head. But we'll get back to you. Maybe we'll talk about that on the Tuesday show, Trey. That y'all will fire up for the rankings. Big 12 storylines. And this is presented by Baller Pickleball. Use our code 3TechPod for 10% off your order over there. Colorado 41, Texas Tech 27. Guys, we now live in a world where Colorado controls their destiny to get to the college football playoff. And honestly, good for them. They played good football. They were down 13-10 at the end of the first half, and then they came out and put just pedal to the metal and torch that Texas Tech secondary. We talked about the issues, the concerns that we had with the pass defense for the Red Raiders. They came in 133rd in the country. Yeah, Shedeur started to find some of those openings in the second half. It felt like they got their feet under them. The first quarter, they were rattled by that Red Raider crowd. They were loud. They were slinging the tortillas. Travis Hunter shoving them in his pants. It was just a really weird situation for Colorado, and they did not look locked in. The offensive line wasn't protecting Shedeur all that well. Second half, all of that started to shift. And shout out to the Colorado defensive line because they have quietly been really getting after opposing quarterbacks. They were averaging 4 sacks a game coming into this week, and they kept that rolling against the Red Raiders. They turned Baron Morton over a couple of different times. Guys, I mean, elephant in the room, we haven't talked about it because we're watching this unfold live. I have the Holy War on a second screen. BYU looks kind of stinky tonight. They're down, what is it, 21-10 at the half?
Yeah, that 2-minute drive attempt at the end of the first half was not pretty from the Cougars.
So right now, and we'll talk about the Colorado game in just a second, but right now we are about to maybe live in a world where Colorado sits in first place in the Big 12, depending on what happens, because Iowa State got shoved in a locker by Kansas. I know that was a 1-score game, but Iowa State looked terrible. I've got some thoughts on that in a minute. So I guess, Garrett, take it where you will. Talk about Colorado winning over Texas Tech. I thought Shedeur looked good. and give us kind of a State of the Union, maybe a halftime speech for your BYU Cougars.
Yeah, well, this is a real, conflict of interest for me. I've been the Utah homer for years, standing up for BYU, this year. Really don't know what to say at this moment if you're a BYU fan, except for the fact that you're kind of just killing yourself right now. There's not a whole lot that Utah's done to really, I guess, go up over the top. They've had a couple touchdown drives. I got to give him some credit. Brandon Rose looking pretty good as the quarterback there, helping him get down the field. Hasn't been electric, but definitely doing what he needs to get Utah down the field. But, I mean, guys, BYU going for it on downs. Fourth down, they go for it. They don't convert. Turn the ball over. A couple plays later, Utah goes up, and now it's 21-10. All they got to do is punt, let their defense take care of business, and, you're feeling okay. BYU's got to come out and stop beating themselves in the second half if they want to keep their, hopes alive for the season. It's not like it's over, obviously. You'd still be in a position, I think, based on the rest of the conference to win out, but you don't want to get rid of your margin for error. Obviously, rivalry game. Yeah, BYU is going to have to come out and look a lot better than they did in that first half. I do have trust that they will. They've had a couple of these situations before this year where they come out a little bit flat in that first half and then figure it out down the stretch. Thinking about the Oklahoma State game comes to mind, having to come back in that game. So definitely not over, but it'll be an exciting finish. Can't wait to probably break that one down in the midweek show as well. But it's going to be an exciting game to finish. And if you're not staying up to watch it, you're just wrong.
With the improvements that we've seen from Colorado's defense, Trey, it's really starting to lean towards Colorado not only being the favorite now in the Big 12 because of what they can do on offense and adding in a complete and lethal defense that can turn you over, but this is also starting to feel like a Big 12 team that you don't want to take your chances with in what would be the second round of the playoff, right? Because does anyone think the Big 12 is getting two teams in at this point? I certainly don't.
Not from what we see right now. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think from a talent alone perspective, they're the team that probably scares an SEC or Big Ten average SEC Big Ten team the most in the second round. A lot has been made about wanting the 5 seed because you get to play the G5 representative in theory, and then the worst Power 4 conference champion. Might not want that smoke this year. You might have to deal with Ashton Genty and then Colorado, Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter in your first 2 games. That might be a little more smoke than the average 5 seed wants. But yeah, I think of all the teams, if you're just asking me who I wouldn't want to play as an average Big Ten or SEC playoff team, Colorado's got to be towards the top of that list.
They're right there. I mean, they've certainly emerged. And again, the whole theme of this show has been, who do you trust? Who are contenders? Who are pretenders? Which teams are more complete than others? Because my goodness, if you have a flaw, it's being exposed this year. And we know that Colorado's flaws are in the trenches, right? They have not played well along the offensive line. They did not again today. But the defensive line has taken such immense leaps and bounds forward. The secondary's playing better. It feels like Shadur and his magic is geared towards being able to survive the offensive line, right? Like he's able to extend and create and is willing to run. I think that's one thing that separates him from Cam Ward in my mind is Cam just kind of dances in the pocket. And we said from week 1 that his dancing would eventually cost him. And that is exactly what ended up, ending that game with the strip sack for Georgia Tech. I think Colorado might be putting all the pieces together to at least go claim the Big 12 championship. Now, my case for Boise getting that last bye in the first round was looking really good given these results until they only beat Nevada by 7 at home. I'm starting to think that dream might be dead. So for all intents and purposes, maybe we're looking at a 4th seed Colorado. But I guess turn your attention now to the Big 12 standings. Who gets to Arlington alongside Colorado? Let's say Colorado wins out, which I'll pull up their schedule. Their schedule is Utah, at Kansas, home against Oklahoma State. So 2 home games, 1 road game. Utah looks plucky tonight, but that's in a rivalry game where it's their Super Bowl. Potential letdown situation next week emotionally. Maybe at Kansas is the only game that you're kind of raising an eyebrow at, given what we just saw from the Jayhawks today.
Yeah, Kansas is playing a lot better. Iowa State certainly doesn't seem like a team that wants to go to Arlington right now.
No.
Kansas State's creeping around. Kansas State lost to BYU before we knew what BYU was, and lost in a monsoon to Houston. So creeping around at 2 losses, still a team that I think will have a lot to say about this race, and they can knock Iowa State out of the way, and then they got to get a little bit more help to get back towards that tiebreaker scenario.
Yeah, Arlington is almost certainly BYU, Colorado at this point. Even if BYU loses tonight, they'll both be the 1-loss teams. And then it's Iowa State and Kansas State, both with 2 losses, kind of in that hunt. Arizona State, I guess, technically in that as well. But yeah, you look.
West Virginia has 2 losses.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I had to scroll to get to West Virginia. Sorry. So they also have 2 losses. You are correct, Trey. We'll give the Mountaineers their due. But yeah, I think BYU, even if they lose tonight, Kansas, Arizona State, Houston to end the season doesn't necessarily scare me if you're a BYU Cougar fan. So I think you can almost all but lock that one in. And yeah, I think only one of those teams gets in the playoff.
Did you guys see the tweet from the Smoking Musket earlier today? And it was an upset, confused-looking Cincinnati fan. And the tweet was something like, when you run into the cosmic forces that don't allow Neil Brown to lose enough games to actually get fired. That was a very, very specific and yet true reference, because my goodness, West Virginia with a backup quarterback. I mean, it wasn't even Garrett Green today. They took an early lead, jumped way out to a lead, and then had to hang on. Cincinnati tried to come back in the end, but good for the Mountaineers. Good for the Nears finding something on the road. Maybe they just need to play all their games away from home in the Neil Brown era. I don't know.
That's what Neil Brown wants.
Evidently. I guess we do need to just mention what happened to Iowa State today. And that's, I said they got blown out by Kansas. The final score is 45-36. But if you watch that game, you know that the final score is in no way indicative of those final results. Kansas absolutely decimated the Clones early. They ran for 237 yards, which, Trey, you mentioned. The path to victory for Kansas was through the ground, and Iowa State does not defend the run particularly well this year. Iowa State couldn't move the ball through the first really 2.5 quarters. They ran for just 78 yards. Now, Rocco Beck throws for like 380. All of that really came late in this game as the Clones tried to charge back. But Kansas, good for them, man. They threw a punch early. Jalen Daniels was slinging the rock. I texted you guys they had a wide open strike to the end zone, I think, to go up 14-7 maybe. But Kansas looked locked in. Iowa State continues to find ways to underachieve and to disappoint their fan base. There was a Reddit thread that they hadn't had a 10-win season, or any hope of a 10-win season, I guess, since the Ottoman Empire existed way back in World War I. So the Reddit thread was like, yeah, that's on me for assuming that we were going to put that streak to bed today against, a bad Kansas team. But I don't know what the answer is for Iowa State. It feels like it's like our golf game, right? Like, you can't ever have the drive and the irons and the putting all going at once. Like, something is switched off for the Clones.
I would start by trying to stop the run and maybe run the ball. I think that would be a good plan.
It's a bold strategy there, Cotton. Let's see how it pays off for him.
That typically leads to more winning, but I'm just a humble podcast host. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Losing your rushing margin 237-78, probably not the way to win a lot of football games.
Yeah. I like Matt Campbell, but boy, they've got to fix a lot of things. So the Big 12 is truly the conference of chaos. Again, if you're listening to this after the fact, we won't know the BYU final score, but Trey and Garrett will have all of that breakdown for you on our Tuesday night live show as the rankings come out. I am curious to see if BYU loses as well, what the new order looks like from the CFP committee. That's going to get a lot of reaction.
BYU is going to take a tumble if they lose.
Yeah, they're going to hate
BYU at 9. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. No doubt about that. All right, let's talk about the Big Ten storylines here. And I need to collect the Oregon-Maryland final score. I know Penn State was running away from Washington early, but really the story here with regards to playoff interest is Indiana. They hang on over Michigan, 20-15. The Hoosiers could not move the ball at all. Garrett, you texted at one point, like late in the fourth, Indiana didn't even have positive yards gained against the Wolverines. Credit to Michigan for figuring something out. But guys, the storyline for me was Sharon Moore continues to mismanage the game for Michigan. They had a chance late to get a stop, to get the ball back. And I know their offense hadn't done anything, but what little they had done right was done in the second half. He mismanages calling the timeouts. He lets like 30 seconds tick off before using his first timeout. He's got all three, and even the broadcast was kind of giving him grief for that. For Indiana, it's a little bit of a clunker, maybe, but you do pay it off. You're 10-0 for the first time in program history, first time to 10 wins. Garrett, contender or pretender for Indiana?
I want to say contender, but they got to show me a little bit more. I think this Michigan team is playing better down the stretch. They just keep getting bad results, and they just keep not quite figuring it out. This is not the Michigan team of last year, right? They've lost a lot of players. Obviously, we've documented that very well, but they've been playing a little bit better. And if you've watched their games, they're a lot more competitive on the field than they had been at the beginning of the season. They just don't have it all together yet. And that's why some of these results keep happening. So I'm not necessarily disappointed in Indiana. I wasn't shocked that they came out and struggled in the second half because Michigan's been quietly really good, on defense and especially making adjustments late in games. So I'm not necessarily worried about Indiana. Want to see how they come out against Ohio State. I'm not worried about them yet. You're allowed to have your one off game, right? This is what I talk about. If you're a contender, if you're in that seat, you can have an off game, right? This wasn't Curtis Rourke's best game by any standards. They didn't run the ball very well by any standards. So, yeah, like have your off game, have your game where you didn't show up and bounce back, right? You got to come back and bounce back quick because you're playing Ohio State. But, if they can figure that out, maybe keep it close, stay in that game, then, yeah, I think Indiana can compete this year.
Indiana now has Ohio State right in front of them. That's their next game. That will be the game of the Big Ten, and that's in 2 weeks' time. They get a bye week to prepare for it, which is massive. And then they'll play Purdue to end the season. Trey, I'll ask you the same question. Curtis Rourke has played well this season. Defensive adjustments got to him in the second half today. Indiana's defense, though, as their radio broadcast said late in the fourth quarter, defense kind of won you the game. Is Indiana a complete enough team to challenge Ohio State, maybe even beat Ohio State, and get to Indianapolis and play for a Big Ten championship?
I think it's going to be a close game. I really do. I don't know how you could look at unless you're just a guy that only looks at recruiting rankings and star power, right? I don't know how you can look at what they've done on the field and say that Ohio State's just going to blow Indiana out of the water in 2 weeks. Yes, it's in Columbus. Yes, it seems like most of Indiana's bigger games have been at home, but I mean, they just seem to be a team that's playing much better than the sum of their parts right now. Credit that to coaching, credit that to whatever it is, but I think it's going to be a good, hard-fought game. And if you lose by a score or less in Columbus and you're 11-1, left out of the Big Ten championship game, I don't see how you get left out of the playoff in that scenario.
Yeah, no. To me, you beat Purdue and you're in the playoff. I think Indiana can start dreaming about some plane tickets for sure. Elsewhere around the conference, Oregon and Maryland has gone final 39-18. Dylan Gabriel becomes the FBS's all-time passing leader in touchdowns. He actually throws to an offensive lineman to get that record, so congratulations to Dylan Gabriel. But it was a weird game for the Ducks. They were at home against Maryland. Gabriel doesn't even throw for 200 yards. Throws for 183, 3 touchdowns. The running game got going. They ran for $180. But I do wonder if has Oregon answered all of the questions that you guys had, whether it be preseason or throughout this season? Like, has Oregon checked all of the boxes for you to be the favorite for the national championship?
It's hard to say because I think they're doing more than enough to win these games. They're not exactly playing in close games.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of just vibing out there, right? Like we don't see their game. They're not featured on the big networks all the time because that's how it's going to be with these West Coast Big Ten teams. They're going to be the product of time slots and needing to be at a specific time slot. So not everyone's gotten to really see them, and they're kind of just vibing out there. Like they're not playing close games. They're not eking out wins. They're getting up by a lot of points, and Dylan Gabriel might throw a weird interception here or there, but they're getting up by a lot of points and then just kind of running out the clock and not really worrying about the flash of like a 60-0 score or something like that, like 39-18 in a conference game. Totally fine with the 21-point win and getting out of Dodge and keeping everybody healthy. And it's not sexy. It's not really headline grabbing, but it's the closest thing to a complete elite juggernaut that we have in college football this year.
I can say definitively yes. They're the best team right now in college football, obviously. I think they've done everything to show that. And Trey, I love what you say about vibing. They're just not really trying all that hard. And we're talking about them like they went out there and put up a stinker. They came a point shy of 40. Like, when did 40 points become kind of a ho-hum day and just getting out of Dodge? Like, they put up 39 points. And, they do that, not necessarily trying all that hard. They don't really throw the ball all over the yard. They a lot of run game, obviously. None of the numbers were spectacular necessarily. Defense looks pretty good, but like, I don't know when we, changed and called 40 points kind of ho-hum. When you're doing that and people are looking at you and saying, well, you win by 3 touchdowns and, you didn't even put up 40 points. You stopped at 39. When you start doing that, you're the best team in college football. And we're talking about you that way. Nobody else in college football has shown us anything close to that complete of an effort. And again, kind of just going back on some of their point totals, like they scored 39, 38, 38, 35, 32, 31, 34, 49, 37, and then 24 at the beginning of the year. They've put up 30 plus in every single game outside of the first game of the season. They've put up, 40 in one instance. They're just scoring. They're just doing good things. They're holding teams down. They're figuring it out on defense. They're the best team in college football. They should win the national championship this year.
Interesting. Okay, so I guess that's a great final question to ask. Garrett, you've got Oregon as your national championship favorite?
Yeah, I would put Oregon in the driver's seat right now because they've already beaten Ohio State. Ohio State, I think, came with everything they had at them and couldn't get it done. I do think that Oregon would win that game again. I think that they'd win that game again if they played them again. I don't see anybody in the SEC being complete enough right now to be able to beat them. I think, Texas looks really good. Still not sure that they have a signature quality win against a top team. The Vanderbilt win, very good, but I still need to see them beat a really good team. Got a chance to do it at the end of the season against A&M. But I still am not convinced that anybody else in the SEC is really that complete. Tennessee can run the ball kind of up and down on them. A&M, we've seen them look pretty up and down this season. Take your pick around the country. Nobody in the Big 12 really scares me necessarily. Colorado looks better. BYU's in trouble right now as the third quarter is getting started. Nobody in the ACC really scares me. SMU might win that conference and get the bye. I don't think SMU can go up and compete with Oregon. So I think that this is a year where there's so much chaos. There's so many different moving pieces. There's so many, this coach is, first year coach, this quarterback's a new quarterback in a new system. There's this guy. And for all of that, Oregon seems the most stable to me. They seem to be getting the most stable results consistently. And I'm going to trust that on a playoff run.
Trey, what about you?
I can't disagree with anything Garrett said. It really is. They do seem to be the most complete and the most dominant team at this point in the season. Someone else could emerge and we could see somebody flip a switch, but we just haven't seen that yet. I'd keep an eye on Alabama. I'd keep an eye on Tennessee because they did lose to Arkansas, but they've found a way to grind out games and they might be the favorite in the SEC at this point. And I'd keep an eye on Ole Miss. I'd keep an eye on the Rebels if they can keep getting hot and keep that offense humming. They've got a defensive line that can cause a lot of problems for a lot of teams, but none of those teams is ready to challenge Oregon based on what we've seen on the field at this point. They have a lot of potential and they could get there, but Oregon, in my mind and for my money, is the favorite.
A really stout defense that can get to the quarterback. They're forcing turnovers. And then you combine what that offense can do. I do tend to agree. I think I'd like to see Ohio State get another shot at them. And I know that means that they've got to beat Indiana, and I'm not rooting against the Hoosiers, but I really do want to see another Oregon-Ohio State rematch.
Now, interesting idea. If Indiana beats Ohio State, I can't wait for that game in the Big Ten Championship. That'll be something to watch right there.
It would be tremendous. Absolutely. Absolute cinema, as the kids would say. All right, well, let's get out of here on that. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us on our live show, Week 11 edition. If you are new here again, we'd love to have you join the Jimmies and the Joes going forward. Hit subscribe, hit like, leave a review. Every time we ask for reviews to help grow the show, you guys deliver. So we'd love to have if you haven't left a review, please do, and we'd love to hear from you as well at 3TechPod on all social media. And we will continue to march on towards Week 12. Final playoff rankings coming here in a few weeks. This is what we wait all year for, the chaos of November, and it delivered in spades today. For Trey Reeves and Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Until Tuesday night, so long, everybody.
Gracious, how about